Did Elvis really betray rock and roll? Was the King's musical evolution a slap in the face to those who loved him first? Elvis Presley's transformation from rebellious rock icon to mainstream entertainer remains one of music's most fascinating evolutions. While his career spans countless hits, certain songs marked dramatic departures from the raw energy that initially made him a cultural revolutionary. These musical pivots didn't just change Elvis's career trajectory. They left many original fans feeling abandoned and confused. Number 8. Wooden Heart, 1960. Remember when Elvis was dangerous? When parents feared him entering their living rooms through the television screen? It seems almost impossible to reconcile that Elvis with the one who recorded Wooden Heart, a saccharine track featuring the King singing partly in German. The song appeared in Elvis's movie G.I. Blues and represented everything his early rock rebellion stood against. Wooden Heart was based on a German folk song called Muss I denn, and Elvis alternated between English and German lyrics throughout the recording. This wouldn't have been so jarring if just a few years earlier, Elvis hadn't been the hip-swinging bad boy of American music, the Mississippi truck driver who electrified teenage audiences with his raw sexuality and rhythm. Original fans who had defended Elvis against accusations of moral corruption now found themselves struggling to explain this newfound wholesomeness. The track became a massive hit in Europe, but wasn't even released as a single in America. Initially, perhaps a tacit acknowledgement that stateside fans might reject this neutered version of their rock and roll hero. The production was deliberately old-fashioned, featuring an accordion and a distinctly non-rock arrangement. Gone were the driving rhythms of Hound Dog or Jailhouse Rock, replaced by a quaint, almost childlike melody. For teenagers who had adopted Elvis as a symbol of rebellion, watching him embrace such conventional, parent-friendly material felt like witnessing a revolution being undone. When Elvis entered the Army in 1958, many feared his edge would be dulled by military service. Wooden Heart confirmed those fears for many early supporters. Though commercially successful, the song signaled Elvis's shift toward family-friendly entertainment, a direction that would define much of his 1960s output and alienate those who had been drawn to his disruptive cultural force. Number 7. It's Now or Never, 1960. Can a massive hit still be considered a betrayal? When It's Now or Never topped charts worldwide in 1960, becoming one of Elvis's biggest-selling singles ever. It also marked a decisive break from his rock and roll roots. Based on the Italian aria O Sol Mio, the song showcased Elvis's impressive vocal range but completely abandoned the raw rockabilly style that had made him famous. Instead, Elvis delivered a polished operatic performance that appealed to a broader, older audience, precisely the demographic that had once been horrified by his hip-gyrating performances. The recording session itself reflected this new approach. Gone were the spontaneous, energetic sessions with Scotty Moore and Bill Black that had produced his early Sun Records classics. Instead, Elvis was now surrounded by orchestral musicians and backing vocalists, creating a sophisticated, adult-oriented sound. For teenage fans who had lined up to see Jailhouse Rock in theaters, or who had pinned Elvis's rebellious image on their bedroom walls, this mature musical direction felt like abandonment. While they were still growing up, their musical heroes seemed to be growing old, embracing their parents' musical sensibilities rather than challenging them. Music critics at the time noted this shift. While praising Elvis's vocal prowess, many wondered if commercial considerations had overcome artistic integrity. The song's enormous success, it sold more than 20 million copies worldwide, validated the commercial strategy but further distanced Elvis from the revolutionary figure he had once been. Elvis biographer Peter Gorlnik later wrote that songs like "It's Now or Never" represented the triumph of Colonel Parker's vision for Elvis's career, maximizing profits by appealing to the broadest possible audience, even if it meant diluting the very qualities that had made Elvis culturally significant in the first place. Some early fans viewed "It's Now or Never" as the moment Elvis fully surrendered to mainstream commercialism, trading rock, and roll authenticity for Las Vegas-style showmanship. The song's success ensured this direction would continue, deepening the rift between Elvis and his original fan base. Number 6. Bosa Nova Baby. 1963. Did Elvis actually try to cash in on every passing musical trend? When Bossa Nova Baby appeared in Elvis's 1963 film Fun in Acapulco, it represented one of his most transparent attempts to capitalize on a current musical fad without any authentic connection to his artistic roots. Bossa Nova, the sophisticated Brazilian jazz style, was enjoying international popularity in the early 1960s. Rather than sticking to the rock and roll innovation he had helped pioneer, Elvis and his management team simply jumped on the trending sound, resulting in a recording that felt like musical tourism. The song's arrangement featured superficial bossa nova elements grafted onto a standard Elvis movie tune. For fans who had valued Elvis's authentic connection to blues country and early rock and roll, this trendy detour felt particularly cynical. The performance lacked any genuine understanding of bossa nova's subtle rhythmic complexities or cultural context. Elvis's movie soundtracks were already attracting criticism for their formulaic approach and declining quality. Bossa Nova Baby exemplified this problem, a catchy but disposable track designed to fit a film scene rather than express any authentic artistic vision. The song seemed to confirm critics' accusations that Elvis had become merely a brand rather than an artist making meaningful musical choices. Contemporary reviews noted the disconnect. While acknowledging Elvis could still deliver an energetic vocal performance, critics questioned whether he was simply going through the motions to fulfill contractual obligations. The song's presentation in the film, with Elvis performing in a nightclub setting surrounded by dancers in stereotypical Latin costumes, further emphasized its superficial engagement with the musical style. For original fans, this approach felt worlds away from the Elvis who had once shocked the nation with his raw energy and cultural synthesis of black and white musical traditions. Instead of breaking barriers, he now seemed content following any commercial trend that might extend his movie career, even if it meant producing music that contradicted what had once made him revolutionary. Music historian Grail Marcus would later point to songs like Bossa Nova Baby as evidence of Elvis's wilderness years, a period when commercial considerations completely overshadowed artistic integrity. While new, younger fans might have enjoyed the catchy tune without this context, those who had been with Elvis since his Sun Records days couldn't help feeling that something essential had been lost. Number 5. Old Macdonald, 1967. How low could the king of rock and roll go? When Elvis recorded a version of the children's nursery rhyme, Old Macdonald Had a Farm, for his movie Double Trouble in 1967, many longtime fans considered it the absolute nadir of his creative decline. This wasn't just a departure from rock and roll. It was a bizarre career choice that had Elvis once considered too dangerous for television singing about farm animals with a straight face. The recording featured cartoonish sound effects and a simplistic arrangement that seemed designed for preschool entertainment rather than the man who had once scandalized America with his provocative performances. The song appeared during a period when Elvis's movie soundtracks had reached their creative lowest point. His film contract required him to record songs for increasingly formulaic movies, but Old Macdonald struck many as a particularly humiliating assignment for someone of Elvis's stature in history. Music journalists were brutal in their assessment. One reviewer famously wrote that Elvis singing Old Macdonald was like watching Michelangelo paint by numbers. The comparison highlighted the tragic waste of Elvis's immense talent on material so far beneath his capabilities. For fans who had defended Elvis against early critics who had argued for his artistic legitimacy during the moral panic over rock and roll, this recording felt like a betrayal of everything they had championed. How could they continue to argue for Elvis's cultural significance when he was releasing material that seemed designed to undermine that very argument? The recording session itself reportedly showed Elvis's own dissatisfaction. According to musicians present, he completed the song in minimal takes, showing little enthusiasm and making jokes about the material. Yet professional that he was, Elvis delivered a technically competent performance, even while seeming to recognize the absurdity of the situation. This period marked the lowest point of Elvis's connection with his original fan base. Many who had grown up with his groundbreaking early work had simply moved on, following newer artists who maintained creative integrity, while Elvis appeared trapped in a system that prioritized commercial predictability over artistic expression. Old Macdonald became emblematic of how far Elvis had strayed from his revolutionary beginnings, a rock and roll founding father reduced to singing children's songs in mediocre movies. Number 4. In the Ghetto. 1969. Can social consciousness alienate fans just as much as selling out? When In the Ghetto was released in 1969, it represented yet another dramatic shift in Elvis's musical direction, one that surprised and disoriented many longtime listeners, albeit for different reasons than his movie soundtrack material. Written by Mac Davis, In the Ghetto was a socially conscious narrative song about poverty and the cycle of violence in inner-city America. It marked Elvis's return to recording serious material after years of movie soundtrack fluff. But the song's tone and message were miles away from the rebellious energy of early rock and roll. Instead of encouraging teenagers to defy convention, Elvis was now delivering a somber message about social issues. While this represented artistic growth and maturity, it came as a shock to fans who had first connected with Elvis through the raw excitement and sexuality of his early performances. These original admirers found themselves listening to a sober, middle-aged Elvis, seemingly more concerned with social commentary than musical revolution. The production reinforced this evolution. Gone was the stripped-down, rockabilly instrumentation of his early recordings. Instead, In the Ghetto featured orchestral arrangements and backing vocals that created a polished adult contemporary sound far removed from the energetic simplicity of That's All Right or Blue Suede Shoes. Music critics generally praised Elvis's emotional delivery and the song's meaningful lyrics, recognizing it as a significant artistic statement. Yet many also noted the irony that Elvis, who had once been considered dangerous precisely because his music transcended racial boundaries, was now explicitly addressing racial and economic inequality from a position of unprecedented wealth and fame. The song reached pound 3 on the Billboard charts and helped re-establish Elvis as a relevant recording artist after years of decline. New fans discovered Elvis through this mature, socially aware persona. However, this successful reinvention came at the cost of further estranging those who had been attracted to the rebellious rock and roll pioneer of the 1950s. In the Ghetto represented a version of Elvis that early fans barely recognized, a mainstream pop vocalist delivering messages of social concern rather than youthful defiance. While artistically meaningful, this transition confirmed that the original cultural disruptor who had scandalized 1950s America was gone forever, replaced by an establishment figure whose music now aimed to heal social divides rather than create generational ones. Number 3. American Turd. 1972. Is patriotism the opposite of rock and roll rebellion? When Elvis began performing his elaborate American Turd medley in the early 1970s, Dixie, Battle Hymn of the Republic, and All My Trials into a show-stopping patriotic set piece that became a staple of his live shows, and it drove the final wedge between Elvis and his original rock audience. By this point, Elvis was performing in white jumpsuits with high collars and elaborate embroidery, presenting himself as an almost mythical American icon rather than the hip-swinging rebel who had scandalized the nation on The Ed Sullivan Show. American Turd epitomized this transformation, a grandiose orchestral production that positioned Elvis as a unifying national figure rather than a disruptive cultural force. The medley's inclusion of Dixie, the unofficial anthem of the Confederacy, particularly troubled younger listeners coming of age during the Civil Rights Movement and Vietnam War protests. While Elvis intended the arrangement to symbolize national healing by combining Northern and Southern anthems, many young people in the counterculture saw it as a conservative establishment gesture at a time of profound national division. Elvis delivered the medley with complete sincerity and impressive vocal power. The live recordings capture his extraordinary ability to convey emotion building to stunning climactic notes that tocate his technical prowess. Yet this very sincerity highlighted how completely Elvis had transformed from the sneering rebel of Heartbreak Hotel to a performer who earnestly embraced patriotic spectacle. Music critics noted the generational divide this performance created. While older audiences responded with standing ovations, rock critics from the emerging music press often described American Turd as bombastic and out of touch with contemporary sensibilities. As rock music became increasingly political and experimental through artists like John Lennon, Jimi Hendrix, and The Doors, Elvis's patriotic medley seemed to position him firmly on the conservative side of the cultural divide. For original fans who had embraced Elvis precisely because he challenged the establishment in the 1950s, this evolution was particularly jarring. The artist who had once been denounced from pulpits was now embracing quasi-religious patriotic imagery. The singer, who had been condemned for bringing black music to white teenagers, was now performing Dixie in Las Vegas showrooms. While Elvis continued to attract large audiences, American Turd confirmed that his cultural position had fundamentally changed. He was no longer leading youth culture, but instead appealing primarily to an older, more traditional audience that valued spectacle and sentimentality over the dangerous edge that had defined early rock and roll. Number 2, My Way. 1977. How does a revolutionary end up embracing the ultimate conventional anthem? When Elvis began performing Frank Sinatra's signature song, My Way, in the mid-1970s, the choice perfectly symbolized how completely he had transitioned from youthful rebel to mainstream entertainment. Originally written for Sinatra, My Way celebrated individualism through the lens of an older man looking back on his life, hardly the perspective of the young truck driver who had recorded "That's All Right" at Sun Studios in 1954. Elvis's decision to adopt this middle-aged anthem of self-satisfaction seemed to confirm that he no longer identified with youth, culture, or musical innovation. The song became a staple of Elvis's later concerts, where he performed it with full orchestral backing and dramatic vocal flourishes. His interpretation emphasized the bombastic elements of the composition, turning it into a showcase for his still impressive vocal power, but abandoning any connection to the musical styles that had made him revolutionary. For rock purists, Elvis singing "My Way" represented a complete capitulation to the very establishment he had once challenged. The young man who had combined country and rhythm and blues into something dangerously new was now performing a song associated with the pre-rock era of entertainment, and doing so without irony or reinvention. Critics noted the strange trajectory this choice represented. John Landau wrote that hearing Elvis perform "My Way" was watching a man publicly surrender the last vestiges of uniqueness. Others pointed out the disconnect between the song's lyrical claims of individualism and Elvis's increasingly formulaic performances and career choices. What made "My Way" particularly alienating to original fans was that it seemed to rewrite history, positioning Elvis as someone who had charted a deliberate, controlled career path when his early appeal had been precisely about spontaneity and artistic instinct. The raw, unpredictable energy of Mystery Train or Baby Let's Playhouse had been replaced by calculated showmanship and polished professionalism. Elvis's interpretation of "My Way" became even more poignant after his death in 1977, when it was often played as a retrospective epitaph. For newer fans who knew Elvis primarily through his Las Vegas era, the song seemed fitting. But for those who had been there at the beginning, it represented how completely their revolutionary hero had been absorbed by the mainstream culture he had once challenged. Number 1. Are You Lonesome Tonight? Spoken word version, 1960. Can you still be a rock and roll icon when you're reciting Shakespeare? When Elvis recorded the spoken word section of "Are You Lonesome Tonight?" in 1960, directly quoting Jacques' famous "All the World's a Stage" monologue from Shakespeare's As You Like It, he created a musical moment so far removed from rock and roll that many original fans couldn't recognize their former hero. The song had been originally recorded by numerous artists dating back to 1927, and its old-fashioned melody already represented a significant departure from Elvis's energetic early style. But it was the spoken middle section, delivered with theatrical seriousness, that truly symbolized Elvis's transformation from rockabilly rebel to mainstream entertainer. RC executives reportedly had serious doubts about releasing the song, concerned it would confuse Elvis's audience. Their concerns weren't unfounded. While "Are You Lonesome Tonight" became one of Elvis's signature recordings and a massive commercial success, it also accelerated his artistic pivot away from the teenage audience that had first supported him. The recording itself was technically impressive. Elvis delivered the spoken verse with surprising dramatic skill, imputing a level of artistic sophistication few would have expected from the young man who had scandalized America just a few years earlier. Yet this very sophistication marked a definitive break from the instinctual, emotionally direct quality of his early rock recordings. Music historians often point to this recording as the moment Elvis fully embraced middle-of-the-road pop-over rock and roll authenticity. While his voice remained distinctive, the material and presentation aligned him with traditional pop singers rather than continuing the musical revolution he had helped start. The song's massive success, it topped the Billboard Hot 100 for 6 weeks, validated Colonel Parker's strategy of positioning Elvis for maximum commercial appeal rather than artistic innovation. This commercial triumph ensured that similar material would dominate Elvis's recordings throughout the 1960s, further alienating those who had been attracted to his earlier, more dangerous persona. In live performances throughout his later career, Elvis occasionally parodied the spoken section, seemingly acknowledging its distance from his rock and roll origins. During his famous 1968 comeback special, he revisited his early material with renewed energy, briefly reconnecting with the raw sound that had first made him famous. But this brief return to form was followed by years of Las Vegas performances where songs like "Are You Lonesome Tonight" took center stage. The song remains one of Elvis's most recognizable recordings, but it represents a fundamental contradiction in his legacy. The young man who had helped create rock and roll by breaking musical and cultural barriers eventually became most famous for performances that embraced convention rather than challenging it. For those original fans who had seen in Elvis a symbol of youthful rebellion and cultural transformation, this evolution was nothing short of betrayal. Will Elvis ever be fully understood? Can any artist maintain revolutionary status forever? Or is commercial compromise inevitable?